Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. We're going to talk about Thieves Tools, disarming traps, disabling traps. That is the topic for today. So yes, this is the disabling traps in Dungeons & Dragons for player characters. And it's going to be mostly system agnostic, not completely, but lots of elements of this will apply to any version of the game, not just Dungeons & Dragons 5e. So when it comes to disabling traps, the basics is like you found your trap, you know how it works, it's time to deal with it, and then you need to actually disable that trap, and that can include a few different actions. You can disarm the trap, avoid the trap, trigger the trap. Okay, you can jam up the trap, you can destroy the trap, and you can dispel magical traps. Some traps can't be disarmed, so you have to look at alternatives. Expect a dexterity check using a set of Thieves Tools to disable or sabotage a trap. That's not always the case, but usually expect something like that. A sleight of hand check can be used or called upon by a dungeon master when disarming a trap potentially. It's not necessarily going to be the case, but if you have sleight of hand and you're proficient, a dungeon master could use that if they wanted to, if they're playing D&D 5e. Do you need Thieves Tools to actually disable a trap? It's a good question. It actually depends on the nature of the trap. Some traps would require Thieves Tools, and some traps will not work. You cannot disable them with Thieves Tools. And in fact, some traps don't actually need to be disarmed or disabled with a tool of any kind. There's just a way of doing it. So what would be a good example of a trap? Even though usually we find ourselves using Thieves Tools to disable traps, a hunting trap is actually designed to be disarmed without tools. You don't use Thieves Tools, you don't use any tool. You simply place your foot, there's a side mechanism, and you place your foot on it, and you step down, and it opens up. That's basically how it works. What about proficiency with Thieves Tools? Well, the good thing about having proficiency with Thieves Tools is it allows you to actually add your proficiency bonus to an ability check to disable a trap. So it's not a useless thing to have. Do you need proficiency with Thieves Tools to use it for disabling a trap? So are you required? Can you have a set of Thieves Tools but not be proficient to use it? Do you need to have that proficiency in Thieves Tools to disable a trap? Well, that's really pretty much up to the dungeon master to decide. Like if your dungeon master says no, you don't need it, and if your dungeon master says yes, you do need it, then that's how it kind of works. There's nothing really spelled out in the rules that stipulate exactly how that's supposed to operate. The designers sort of did give you the impression when you read through what they've got there that anybody can try anything. But if you aren't proficient in Thieves Tools, when you make that disabling trap check, you don't get to add your proficiency bonus to the dice roll. That's the big difference if you decide to allow people to do this. If the Dungeon Master already allows a player character to use a skill that they are proficient with disabling a trap, and they also have proficiency in Thieves Tools, that character can be granted advantage. Or you could also allow them to have automatic success, because not only are they highly skilled in the area, that's the skill that you have decided to use, but they are also highly skilled with using Thieves Tools. They are proficient. Okay? But again, this is a Dungeon Master discretion concept. It's a ruling that, or guideline should I say, that comes out of Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and it's not actually in the main core books. So if you were wondering, what am I talking about? It's because it's in a different book. Generally, Dungeon Masters will set a high DC for disabling a trap, much higher than Wizards of the Coast's pre-made adventures. Why? Because disabling traps is usually considered by a Dungeon Master to be a risky endeavour. It's a risky task. So therefore, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be very easy, and it's probably not going to be moderately difficult. So you may find yourself with quite high DCs for disabling traps. Something to bear in mind. But Wizards of the Coast actually allows for a 50% or greater success rate when any kind of character, and it doesn't matter what level you are, when disabling traps. So you'll find the DCs that Wizards of the Coast will set are DC 10, DC 15, and that's pretty much about it. Whereas if you're dealing with your own home group and a dungeon master that doesn't operate like this, then you'll probably find that most dungeon masters not following pre-made adventures are setting higher DCs than this. Dispel magic, counterspell, and shield will generally deal with most magical traps unless the character is deemed by the dungeon master to be unaware of the magical effect. And as a result, you can't use your reaction spell to stop it. Now, dispel magic is not a reaction spell, but you can ready it and cast it. But the other problem is too, it's not so much about the fact that you have a reaction spell or you have a readied action to put into place. When I say unaware, what I mean is you can't see, hear, or notice it in some way. And if you're not aware that it's going to take place, then of course you wouldn't be able to use your reaction to do so. Okay. The shield spell will only be effective against spells and projectiles that have an attack. Anything that has an attack roll against the character's armor class or the monster's armor class, that's the only time that the shield spell would be effective. But a lot of people fail to realize that there are occasions where it might actually come up where the trap that's triggered has an attack roll rather than including some sort of saving throw. And so therefore your shield would be quite useful. And you never know, your dungeon master might give you a benefit by having the shield spell up. The Arcane Trickster can use Mage Hand with Thieves Tools to disable a trap from a distance, which is actually awesome. You can't normally do this. You can't use in conjunction Mage Hand and Thieves Tools without being an Arcane Trickster currently in the game of Dungeons & Dragons 5e. So if you want to do that, you've got to have that. If you can't reach the trap trigger and there is a dart hole or dart holes involved, either in the floor, the walls, or whatever, you could try jamming up those holes with something like wax, stones, cloth, or bark. And that's to stop the projectile from firing out if you can't get at the trap trigger itself. Now, of course, if you can't get to the holes without triggering it because the trap trigger's in the way, it's probably not going to work either. But you may be able to put something up against those holes to stop the things that are in there, the poison darts, from flying out. Jam a pressure plate for a trap with a piton. That's the little piece of metal that slides into a rack, a crack in a rock, and you bang it in with a hammer when you're climbing, the piton, or an iron spike. These are things that are designed specifically for jamming things up, and this is sometime a time where you might want to use it to actually jam a pressure plate, bearing in mind that it could also go off when you try to put it into place. If disarming a trap is too risky, try avoiding the trap and going around it in some way. So you can go around a trap, you can go over a trap, you can go under a trap potentially, you can teleport past a trap. Sometimes the best way to deal with a trap is just to have nothing to do with it and just avoid it completely. Spells are actually pretty good at getting a character past a trap, like Misty Step. It doesn't have a long range, but it's still pretty effective. You have Dimension Door, you have Teleport, you have the Fly spell. Pass Wall might be very useful in this situation. Gaseous Form and Stone Shape, particularly if you need to make like an extra door to get through a place where you know you don't want to go. And then of course we have Spider Climb. Spider Climb can be used to avoid traps that have a tripwire, a pressure plate that are either situated on the floor or the walls, and what you do is you simply climb along the ceiling to the other side to avoid all of that stuff. Only deliberately trigger a trap from a distance if it blocks your way forward. If you could take a different route, and then that's probably better to do that. If you find yourself in a situation where you are having to trip a trap, only do so if the route that you're taking forward is absolutely necessary. It's probably not wise as a dungeon master to stick a trap in the way that stops complete forward movement without providing an alternative. And also too, you usually don't want to try and deliberately trigger a trap unless you have tried alternative options. Otherwise, it's honestly, it's better to leave it alone. Some traps will reset when triggered, so check it's no longer active before proceeding. When you do actually trigger that trap, make sure it doesn't reset on you. Dispelling the magical effect may not be permanent if the dungeon master has put the magical trap on a reset timer. Sometimes these magical traps, even though you think you've got rid of the effect, it's not gone, it's still there. The spell knock can be used at range of about 60 feet to unlock any kind of potentially trapped doors or treasure chests. It doesn't mean it opens it though, so you still need to have a way of opening it, but it will unlock it and therefore make it easier for you to find an alternative way to open it. Maybe use your 10-foot pole to lift up the lid, maybe you stick a grappling hook on it, maybe you simply just use mage hand after it's been unlocked. The 10-foot pole can be used to trigger traps. It's not just for finding traps, but you can actually trigger a trap with a 10-foot pole if the range of the trap is known and it's very short. If it's not short, it may not be a very good idea. What about summoning a creature or a familiar and you use them to trigger that trap? You sacrifice your summoned creature or familiar so that you can get past the hazard. The animate dead spell can be employed to create skeletons and zombies, and they can activate the trap for you so that your characters can get past safely. The shatter and firebolt spell can be used to destroy objects but also structures. So that means you could potentially destroy the object or structure of a trap rather than doing something else. Weapons can also be used to destroy a trap if you can stand close enough to it without it activating on you or killing you. Okay? So not the best technique, but it can be used. Use the following spells to trigger a trap. These are probably some of the best techniques for triggering a trap at a distance, and that is Unseen Servant. It's an easy spell to get. Something like Telekinesis, the Animate Object spell, and then of course Big B's Hand. All of these are pretty effective at actually triggering a trap so that you don't wind up triggering it with your player character and then dying or taking a whole lot of hit point damage. So the intention with this was to give you a great huge list of different things that would work in your game and be efficient and effective. And I'm hoping that you found this useful. Please let me know in the comments section what was useful to you and what wasn't. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.